G'day guys, Ben and Simon from Pumped on Property here, and I've got to say, I'm pretty pumped about today, man.
Yeah, dude, we haven't talked.
That's the worst high-five.
We haven't talked about this sort of stuff for a little while now, so thought new year, let's start talking about some of the reasons why we love Brisbane. Obviously, we've been up here investing in Brizzy for the last 6 or 7 years, but there is still so much value moving forward up to the Olympics, which can't wait to run through a few different little bits and pieces.
You know, the reason for this one today, guys, is I've been noticing a whole lot of articles coming out in Sydney and Melbourne in the Financial Review, the Courier Mail, around house prices in Brisbane doing as much as potentially doubling between now and the Olympics. So I think it's really timely, because we don't want all of you guys to rush into the Brisbane market a year, 2 years before the Olympics. We want to get people in early and get the most of the capital gains over that period of time.
And that's not just because of the Olympics, right? Like, we've done a lot of study on historic growth and historic performance and how certain markets in Australia perform at different times. And, you know, yes, as we lead up to the Olympics, there's likely to be mass speculation, like down in Sydney, you know, from 1997 through to 2003. Property values went up about 97% over that period of time. But if you look at what happened in Sydney before 1997, from about 92, 93 up to 97, there was still some solid capital gains. So those people that bought in Sydney in, say, 92, 93, they were the ones that won the most. They were the ones that generated the most capital gains in their properties. And that's why we really love Brisbane, because, you know, the next 4 to 5 years also look really interesting in Brizzy as well.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that as one of the main points, but we are entering the second half of the real estate cycle, which, based on, you know, almost 100 years worth of history and 60 that we've personally looked at, the second half looks insane for Brisbane. So yeah, I'm excited to bring this to you. But before that, bro, you've just finished Surf February.
Yeah. So I just did a fundraiser for the last month in February, where I was trying to raise some money for cancer research, something that we're passionate about. We've unfortunately lost 2 uncles and a grandfather to cancer. And it's something that hits close to home for us. So wanted to do my part, and fortunately, this charity organisation in Australia called Surf February, does exactly that, and it was really cool, like, just to have the mentality of getting in the ocean every single day, surfing as often as I possibly can. It just felt awesome, like, you know, I just love getting in Mother Nature, getting in the ocean, just being super present, not being on my phone, chatting with some of the old boys and the younger kids out there in the water, just having a bloody good time. So,
are you one of the old boys yet? Like,
nah, dude.
Compared to the 14-year-olds cruising around in the water, I feel like I'm that old dude now.
I've been surfing these waves for like 6 years, and I still don't feel like a local out there, right? So it takes a little while up here, but I've just joined the local surf club, the local board riders club. So maybe that'll start to change.
Bro, you don't even fucking talk to me when we're surfing out there. You're like around chasing your own waves. 1 minute he's 200 metres down the beach, another minute he's 200 on the other side.
And then everybody follows me because I'm finding the best waves. But what about you, man? Like, you just had a sea urchin cut out of your foot yesterday because you've been surfing over in Bali.
Yeah, so I just got back from a really spontaneous trip. So I've got 2 like equally important values I found out after doing the happiness trap thing. One of them is accountability and responsibility, like being very structured and organized and very like looking after the people that I care about. And the other one is like, which is constantly in conflict, is absolute freedom.
Yeah.
I like have a part of me that's like Fight Club, like almost like F the system type vibe.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know, like when I was actually in Sydney with some clients recently, one of them called me the Milky Bar Kid. He's so vanilla and straight. I'm like, oh yeah.
So vanilla and straight. Yeah, little does she know.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's just fun. So I was talking to a mate, he's just about to have his first bar macca in Sydney, who I've done some property stuff with in the past. And he was like, dude, last night I booked a trip to New Zealand on the spur of the moment. I'm like, I still love doing that.
Yeah.
So I went home and booked a flight to Bali for the family like 10 days later. And Elisa walks in and it's just printed on the fridge, and she's like, what's this? And I'm like, we're going. And she's like, we're not going. But we ended up getting over there and having a time. Like, it was sick, surfed every single day, sometimes a couple of times. yoga, train, just love time with them. Like in Bali, as you know, like particularly there, so much rubbish washes up every tide. And so we were just like scavenger hunting the beach, and it was just so funny to see them like collect their little offerings and stuff. And I just having a ball, getting massages. We took them to the zoo, which I know isn't everyone's cup of tea, but they're just kids.
Yeah, of course.
They had a ball, and we went to the water park, took them snorkeling at Nusa Penida. So I loved it. But yeah, sea urchin, my foot was sore. The Balinese doctor didn't really give me the right advice. He's like, just smash it with a bottle, which I did for a few days. Got pretty infected, and then it got cut out.
I wonder why.
The x-ray is pretty funny.
Yeah, just grab this bintang that I've been smashing and smash that up.
Actually, he came in drinking a bintang.
Smoking a sticky and drinking a bintang.
No, he's a legend. We've had to get him out a few times for ear infections for the kids over there now, so we fully know him.
Yeah, how good's that? Oh, man, it's so cool. You're feeling excited for the year ahead now that you're back, super refreshed and recharged after some time off?
What I did, man, I was reading some stuff I was reading a new work by Eckhart Tolle over there.
Oh, yeah.
And I had these 3 days where I was really like coming from the I am, like the full observer from like the soul point, and just watching my thoughts and emotions and going, this is just my history. This is not who I am. And then I've really started to visualize like myself and feel it like I'm healthy, I'm happy, I'm joyful, like I've got good relationships, I'm surfing well, like actually visualizing myself surfing better and stuff like that. And it's just, I don't know if it's airy-fairy, but...
Well, you have to visualize yourself surfing better because in reality you don't.
I have to. And it's like, maybe this will never happen.
No, that's a beautiful thing, man. Like Eckhart Tolle's got some really cool books and gives you some really good guidance to just live in that present moment and just experience life as it comes at you rather than like forcing situations.
That's it. Like I'm such a go-getter and such a I'll make it happen at the expense of everything type person based on my past. And it's like I was watching that Jerry Lopez doco, like the yin and yang, and just this concept of like be and let be. Like there is a natural middle point for all of us to exist in. And so I was like, I had these 3 days where I was just almost silent in the mind and in the body. And off the back of that, I just got crystal clear on what I want. And that is just a super simple life where we get to help people like yourselves listening to this, help our families and ourselves, and just be healthy and well and like joyful and just happy like kids again. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And like just promoting that lifestyle that we've both manufactured. You know, it's been 15 years of really hard work and sacrifice for you to get to this point in time. You know, I feel like I'm about 8 years into that journey at the moment, and you know, still a while away from where I'm wanting to get, but it is intense to have the, you know, constant sacrifice and grinding and saving and investing and overcoming challenges and facing those fears that we all have. But then now that you're there, you know, just to give clarity to me and Crystal and Hayden and the team and every single one of our clients of like, you know, you can get through this as well. Like I've been there, so you can do it too. And just taking a little bit of the pressure off as well. Like, cause obviously you did it in that, you know, very assertive, like ambitious way.
The rock up the hill way.
Yeah. And now you can teach other people how to do it where it's more in alignment with your lifestyle, your values, your goals. So it's not that constant battle, constant tension, and it's a bit more balanced.
Fully, like life is short and life is so fun. And it's like just remembering that. Like I had this moment over there where I was just, I was actually walking down the beach and I was like, oh, because this board looks sick is what I said to myself. And then there were 2 kids like walking next to me and they looked at me and like, this guy's talking to himself. And I'm like, oh, I was reading it in the Eckhart book too. Like I'm that crazy dude just speaking to myself walking down the beach. And then I'm like, hang on, we're all that crazy, dude. We just don't verbalize it in our mind. I started laughing at that. Like it was almost just like, oh, don't take this shit so seriously. Like it can be a fun journey. There's parts of all our lives that can be like pretty gnarly, but like it's just the journey as well. And financial freedom's simple with the right plan.
And that's the thing, like, you know, we're using property as a vehicle to achieve financial freedom. It's going to take time, but, you know, that's what this video is sort of about, like 10 reasons as to why we should be investing in property, but more specifically why we should be investing in property in Brisbane at the moment. Because, this is what's worked for you and this is what's getting you to financial freedom. It'll also enable me to reach that goal at some point in the future. And and then we'll be able to obviously help other people get there as well. So let's get stuck into some of these different things. Obviously we've been studying the market for a long time. So what is, one of the things that you absolutely love about Brisbane, where we should start right now?
I think one of the biggest things that you and I found, when was it? Back in 17 or 18?
Yeah, it would have been about 18. Yeah.
Was this article by homely.com.au, and they looked at 50 years or 46 years in that article. We've just added 5 years to that now.
Yeah, I still have it bookmarked in my browser because I like going back to it.
And printed in my desk. And I look at it quite regularly.
Yeah, because it's mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing. And they looked at Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, year on year for that 50-year period. And then us being who we are, we overlaid our own versions plus Phil Anderson's cycle. And what I found pretty clearly is that Sydney and Melbourne do extremely well in the first half of a cycle after a GFC. So let's say the GFC ended in 2012. Between 2012 and 2020, you'd normally expect in the first 7 to 8 years Sydney and Melbourne to pump, which they did. And then what happens is they get so expensive, so unaffordable, rents go through the roof that people just massively move out.
Yeah.
About the same time as people are moving out, we're far enough into a cycle where banks are lending money, construction is booming globally. And so commodity prices spike, which means people fly to places like Brisbane and Perth because that's where the higher paying easy money jobs are during the second half of the cycle. And so Brisbane, what we found, does very, very well because of that. So when we looked at the data, growing up in Sydney, I always thought Sydney would be it.
Yeah.
That's what everyone says, right?
Yeah.
But when we averaged the total return by the number of years, Sydney averaged 9.6% a year per annum. Melbourne did 9.5%. And Brisbane did 9.7%. And that really was at that point that you and I really started doubling down on Brisbane.
Absolutely. And then to add on to that, last year we got the article from CoreLogic where they looked at 30 years of capital gains in Australia and what that indicated. Now, it looked at all 7 metro markets and it looked at houses in those 7 metro markets. And over the last 30 years, the average house in those metros has gone up by 453%. So if you divide 453% by 30 years, it spits out just over 15%. That is one of the top performing assets in Australia, regardless of what you're investing in. And the fact that you can leverage your cash into that type of percentage gain as well is just...
I'd love to see what the return looks like on cash. Because it's 15% on leverage. It's really exciting to me what has happened in property.
Yeah.
And for me personally, knowing how hard it's been to access money for private development since 2015 in Australia, this is why we've got this chronically undersupplied housing shortage now. It's because the government stepped in, made it really difficult, and the banks haven't been lending money for development, which means houses haven't been built. And we've got this chronic undersupply, 200,000 people moving in a year, plus 500,000 students coming in. And then what we didn't expect from COVID is that 500,000 Australians from all over the world would come rushing back and boot everyone out of the places that they owned here. And, we'd end up with this rental crisis, which is why rents have gone up $200 a week in Australia since the start of COVID.
Yeah, I love the population growth that is happening. That is one of the things that I wanted to talk about as well because, Australia is just rife with population growth at the moment. It's one of the best economies in the world, one of the safest countries to live in the world. It's constantly rated as, one of the most livable countries, always in sort of the top 5. So people are just flocking back in now that they have that availability and the Australian government is kind of opening up the floodgates and, a lot of them are skilled, high-paid workers that are going to be massively contributing to our economy. A lot of students as well because we've got such an amazing education system with the universities. So you've got all of these Chinese and Indian students coming in at the moment to get access to better education and trial it here and be interesting to see how many are moving in. But, right now, if you look at Brisbane, it's got about 2.7 million people that live within the greater Brisbane region. We've got about a little over 350,000 people up here on the Sunshine Coast, a little over 750,000 people down on the Gold Coast, and another huge population. I'm not sure what Toowoomba is, but around 100,000. So those four, I guess, one major metro market and three quite large regional markets, make up Southeast Queensland. And that's where the majority of people in Queensland actually live. This is where the majority of the population gains are being experienced right now. And by the mid-2040s, so in about 22 years from now, they expect the greater Brisbane population to be at over 5 million people, which is bigger than Sydney. And you're already seeing these supply constraints at the moment with the amount of demand that we have. So, until it gets easier for these developers to be able to bring new supply to the market, like looking at the state of the states from CBA as well, it indicated that Queensland has some of the lowest constructions being completed in this particular year, which is just fueling the rental crisis and will likely continue to put more pressure on property prices. And that is, at the end of the day, what leads a cycle, right? Supply and demand. So the more population means the more demand. And with this being Southeast Queensland on the eastern seaboard, there's obviously only a limited amount of supply that we're going to have, especially because it is relatively similar to Sydney as you go west in Southeast Queensland with the escarpment, the hinterland, the mountains that are quite difficult to develop. Yeah.
It's exciting, bro. Like, not only is Greater Brisbane going to be 5+ million people in 21 years, but if you look at, this is a beautiful thing about governments, right? They publicly release all this stuff. So their 50-year vision is 60 million people in Australia. I talked to Phil Anderson about this, and it's in his book, The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking. He said real estate cycles in America were never as severe on the downside when the population was growing like wildfire.
Right.
And so if you look at The Power and the Land, Fred Harrison's book, the downside in real estate was never as bad when commodity prices were high and population was growing in the UK either. And so what we've got now is this perfect storm of like a global construction boom as China, India, Southeast Asia becomes developed and diversified. And going to Bali from 5 or 6 years ago when we were there to now, you wouldn't recognize most of it. Like, it is just going off there right now. Roads, pathways, parks, like villages just being built out of thin air.
And that's Bali, which is a tiny little island in Indo. Like, look at Java, Jakarta, like these places where, you've got hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah, and you look at Australia, so that means we need sand, we need rock, we need oil, we need gas, we need petrol, we need coal, we need uranium, we need precious metals. And all of this stuff Australia is abundant in. So I think the second one is the population growth in Southeast Queensland and Australia is very, very much positive for medium to long-term property price growth because there is wealthy people. Like, Australia doesn't let 200,000 people come in that are
going to live on the street.
Exactly. They bring in skilled labour to meet the demands of like whatever the industries that are lacking people at the moment are: IT, engineering, medicine.
Exactly. They get really loose for those people as well and just let them in, like literally open the floodgates.
You want to pay it, we'll let you in.
Exactly. Now, the third thing is the unemployment rate. Now, this can be a positive and a negative. But at the moment, Queensland has the lowest unemployment rate in all of Australia. We've got, historic low unemployment levels in Australia at the moment as well. So it's good that we're pumping the population growth at the moment to try and deal with some of those issues because, with those lower unemployment rates, that can sometimes lead to a little bit more inflation because people have got more disposable income and they've got more savings in the bank.
People have just got to fight for jobs, right? And when there's like low talent and high demand for roles, wages go up because people will pay more. And so I think that's important, as is the fourth point, which is rents.
Yeah.
The vacancy rates in Southeast Queensland are the lowest in Australia, I think outside of Perth and Adelaide right now. We're talking less than 1%, which is chronically undersupplied. I've heard many stories from managers in the last year and a half, 2 years, where people have been sleeping in cars. Sometimes they're getting 40 plus 50 applications. We completed a granny flat for a client recently and got 129 groups through in the first day, over 21 physical applications on the first hour.
Yeah.
this is huge, and that's why CoreLogic's sort of suggesting that we could see rents again in southeast Queensland jump another $100 a week in 2023.
Yeah, like they've gone up almost 25% over the last 12 months, according to SQM, which is, good because that's a bit of a hedge against the interest rates coming up for investors and homeowners. But it is tough for people that can't afford to buy their own home yet, and they are in that rental market. The fifth thing I love is just southeast Queensland is a booming region. You've been up here for 13 years, 14 years?
Yeah, 15 probably.
15 years now. I've been up here for 6 years now, and even I'm witnessing it. Like you drive from the Sunshine Coast to the Gold Coast on the M1, and the amount of roadworks, the amount of cranes that you see in Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, and in Brisbane City is insane. They're widening all the highways. They're upgrading a lot of the railways. They're building new major arterial roads to just make it a more connected part of Australia, because obviously this population growth is coming. They need to make sure that we can still get around, and it's necessary to see that infrastructure improve. And that's all because of point 6, the Olympic Games. So 2032, only 9 years away now.
That's crazy. Like one of my best mates that I grew up with in Sydney, Swatto, he's been looking to buy a house up here for the last couple of months. But, Swatto was saying he's been working as like one of the head guys for like a major construction plumbing company in Australia. So the big schools that you see, the big hospitals, the big universities, the big like commercial or city residential buildings, he's sort of one of the foremen for that sort of stuff. And he said his company has put out a national call out to every single plumber in the company to move them all to southeast Queensland, because that is where all of the work is going. Now, Swatto's 38. He's never bought a property before. He rang me on the weekend after he heard this. Like they got an email and a text message from the company, and he said, I have to buy now because I've seen what this did in Sydney. I've seen what it did in Canberra. I've seen what it's done in Melbourne. When they put this sort of work out, like they're looking for tens of thousands of dollars. Like it's crazy. So it's really exciting, man, to like see that those softer things that you hear like that are just all part of this bigger story. Yeah,
like they're indicating that it could be $17 billion worth of economic and social benefits for southeast Queensland. So it's not a small amount of money there. It's going to be crazy. And then you think about the speculation that occurs from the Olympics as well. Just the amount of eyeballs, like how many million people watch the Olympics every single event. So, there's going to be, I am a huge fan. Like this is like a bit more off topic, but Australian tourism, their advertisements, in my opinion, are the best in the world. Like they have the coolest ads, and they're going to be pumping this for the Olympics. So, obviously you've got all of the infrastructure that needs to be built, which is like, I think they're saying about 130,000 jobs could created off the back of all of this infrastructure spending and getting southeast Queensland prepared for the Olympics. But then can you imagine the tourism that's going to come post the Olympics as well?
People start to see the Great Barrier Reef. They start to see the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, and all of a sudden, like, it's just a billion eyeballs, and some of those people want to come back in.
Yeah.
Because global tourism isn't anywhere close to where it was, I believe, still. Like, they say that last year was like a record year in terms of like domestic and international travel. But I don't think, from going overseas a couple of times in the last year or few years, like that it is anywhere close to what it used to be yet. And we're noticing it here. Like, we still haven't got all the Europeans back to Australia yet.
No.
Like, we still haven't got all the Americans back. Like, people are going close to home.
Yeah.
But even in Bali, like there was Aussies and there was Russians, and there was nothing sort of in between that. And so like it's not nowhere near close to back. And that's when we bring back the education to Australia and the tourism on top of the commodities and job boom at the moment and the construction one that's about to occur.
Yeah.
It's a good story.
Yeah, it's a perfect storm. It's fueling the fire. And then you look at the predictions of what could potentially happen in this second half of the real estate cycle as well. Like Phil threw out last year that he believes some markets could go up between 30% to 80% in some locations.
Next 4 years, by the way. We're not talking about to the Olympics, like 4 years.
Yeah, and the analysis that Simon Priestley did was the exact same. Like he sort of found that. And that's not just picking a number out of thin air and throwing it out there. This is based off previous growth cycles. And last year we went down to the Phil event, and what he did was he averaged out the markets in Australia as to how they've performed over the last 3 cycles. And the reason that I think Phil got that number is because you can see that Brisbane has done about 129% on average over the last 60 years, during its 14 years of growth. And, you know, when you look at the average area, like, yes, there is some suburbs like, you know, really close to the city, Wollongabba, these types of locations, Bulimba, they've gone off their head, and they're probably 100% more expensive today than they were 7 years ago. But then when you look at other suburbs that are only 40%, 50% more expensive today than they were when this cycle started, there's still a really high ceiling there and a lot of potential moving forward.
You know, what I originally liked about Brisbane when we stopped buying Sydney and the Central Coast was this idea that there was a huge price discrepancy on average between what had happened in Sydney and Brisbane.
Yeah.
And now what I love about Brisbane even more is that discrepancy is still there, even more severe. But then within Brisbane, there's the same discrepancy, and 10 years ago there wasn't. So you've got some suburbs that have literally doubled. Then you can be 3 to 7 Ks down the road and the same area just a bit further away, like without as good a brand name right now, but in 15 years it will change. That has done 3, maybe 4% over the same time. So it could be undervalued as much as 50 to 60% relative to suburbs 5 Ks up the road right now.
And that's just how property markets and property cycles work. Like, it happens in Sydney, it happened in Melbourne in this current cycle. It starts closer to the infrastructure, closer to the amenities, closer to the city, closer to the beaches. And then you hear the term, the ripple effect. And the ripple effect is as it starts sprawling out a little bit further. And then, you know, that's always just been a term that people use. But then Jeremy Shepherd from DSR actually put that into a study where he looked at Sydney property prices. And what he indicated was that markets that have performed really well in the first 10 years of a cycle typically underperform in the second 10 years. And then those suburbs that have underperformed in the first 10 years typically overperform in the following 10 years. And you know, it all makes logical sense once you start unpacking these things.
Yeah, it's like, you know, Bondi's too expensive. Let's look at Cronulla. Cronulla's too expensive in Sydney. Like, let's move back from the beach to like Sutherland. Sutherland's too expensive. Let's go to Liverpool. Liverpool's too expensive. Penrith, you know what I mean? And it goes that way as people try to make the best decision they can with their budget and what they can afford.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose like we've talked about this 8th point, the second half of the cycle a bit.
Yeah, like Jeff, just to reconfirm, it's very clear when you look at the data that Sydney and Melbourne perform extremely well at the beginning of a cycle. And, you know, maybe it's because they're highly populated areas. They've got a very diverse economy, like they've got a lot of different employment opportunities, and it's just generally time by the time it gets to that first half of the cycle, because they've underperformed in the second half and they've underperformed during the downturn. So they're ready for it. But then, you know, consistently, Brisbane has been one of the top performers in that second half of the cycle. You know, Perth and Adelaide also perform extremely well in that second half of the cycle as well, which is why a lot of people are probably talking about those markets at the moment. So it just goes to show that if you are thinking about investing right now, there is specific locations in Australia that represent significantly more value over the next 5 to 10 years than others. And you know, we're obviously aligning with Brisbane, not because of just the second half of the real estate cycle, but because of the population growth, the infrastructure growth, and the Olympics. It's going to push that cycle out even further.
And it's the East Coast. Like 75% of Australia's future population, job, infrastructure growth, and income growth is going to be between Brisbane and Melbourne.
Yeah.
I'm not rolling the dice against on the East Coast, especially once they've fight off the aviation industry and put in these fast trains, and you can get to Sydney in an hour and a half on a train and people can work. Like, that's going to be exciting.
Yeah, and it's still relatively affordable in Brisbane, like, because people just see the numbers from 2021 and, you know, they see Brisbane property prices going up 30% and they think that it's boomed and they've missed the boat. But
that was mainly isolated within 10 Ks of the city, really.
Exactly. And some of the locations along the river as well. So, you know, it's sitting below $700,000 a median house price at the moment. And knowing that all of those suburbs within 10 kilometres of the Brisbane CBD have a median house price of above $1 million. So when you're starting to look in the outskirts of town in suburbia, where the average Australian lives and works and sends their kids to school in that, 10 to maybe 25, 30 kilometre radius from the city, you can still find super affordable properties. And because of the rental crisis and yields have gone up so strong, still sitting at a 4.3% rental yield, Brisbane wide right now, but you can get better than that in some locations. You can get worse than that in some locations as well. And then with Palaszczuk coming out last year and announcing that investors and homeowners can now build granny flats in their backyard if they meet the local requirements, that's going to just add additional supply to the market, and it's going to give people the opportunity to manufacture more cash flow out of that. So to know that Brisbane's expected to be one of the top performing markets over the next 5 to 10 years in Australia from a capital growth perspective, but then knowing that from a cash flow and a rental yield perspective, it's one of the best in Australia, then also having the capacity, if you're willing to manufacture additional cash flow through a granny flat, we're seeing clients get a 6 to 7% rental yield for properties that are less than 25 kilometres from the city right now with that dual income strategy.
And creating that strategy for 700K, like with the granny flat, like it's exceptional. Like I'm excited about it. And I will say this, guys, like all of Australia has taken a huge bath while everybody's been freaking out about rates going up. Some of the beachside suburbs in Brisbane, I've seen them come down, not on market. If you actually look, they might have come down by 2 to 3%. But I'm buying properties 150K below what I could a year ago in some suburbs. And in some of the more affordable suburbs where the average house price was $520 last June, we're seeing properties sell for $480, $490. It was actually starting to turn. Like since January, confidence is absolutely back. Like our strategy sessions are booking out weeks in advance.
Yeah.
And like people are confident.
We've added more strategy sessions and they're booking out in advance.
Yeah, so like I'm just talking to agents instead of nobody except us rocking up for 6 months. Now we've got 5 to 20 groups rocking up on properties. Instead of no offers, we're having to compete with 2 to 5 offers on every property, which is fine. But we've just had this incredible thing. The Reserve Bank has said for 12 months that the rates are going to hit 5.5 to 6% retail. But every time they go up, it's a surprise. And there was a surprise like last month, and there'll be 2 more surprises before Easter. And so it's giving you guys time that have been sitting on this thing and just waiting for a video like this, the chance to like really take advantage, because the second the rates stabilize, guys, and the second they come down, every single man and his dog that has done nothing for almost 4.5 years now in Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, Brisbane, is going to start buying, and it is going to catch like wildfire with this great reset. So, we'll be buying at that time. There'll be great opportunities around. But I've seen markets in Brisbane where prices have declined by $10,000, $15,000 a month. I've seen markets in Brisbane where they've gone up $100,000 in 2 weeks.
Shit.
So I'll keep buying in both markets, but I don't necessarily love the second one as much as I like the opportunity for the rest of this year.
Yeah. I think just like rather than getting, I guess, too attached to the external world, and like what I've been doing this year is a meditation journal on, it's called the Daily Stoic. And, it's all about trying to realize the things that are in your control and things that are outside of your control. And the majority of the world that we live in is outside of your control, and all you can focus on is what you can look at. And with the media really jumping on these things at the moment and making everybody feel really fearful, like I think it's time to just take stock and think about, okay, well, where am I at right now? Financially, what can I justify? Am I on track to achieving my goals? Am I on track to achieving financial freedom in the future? And if the answer is yes, then, great, kudos to you. But if there's holes in your strategy, or if there's holes in your portfolio, then, I find developing that belief system, that long-term reality that, we do feel as though property is one of the best stores of value. We understand that the Australian population is expected to get to over 60 million people in the not too distant future. It's a lot of supply. Even though there is scary times short term from what's happening on the media, there's still amazing buying opportunities. So we're not really telling people to go out there and buy the $1.5 million property that's lost 15% of its value recently, and, you know, maybe still is. But looking at those properties that are $500,000 to $1 million right now, where you're buying at a discount compared to 12 months ago, demand is slowly but surely coming back into the market, and we're getting very close to that target rate that the RBA has been talking about. It's looking like the data showing that they are starting to get inflation under control, which is exactly what we need. And before we know it, like what we saw in 2020, it can turn around so quickly. Remember October, September of 2020, we saw property prices where we were the only people negotiating, we were the only people inspecting properties, we were the only people in the market, we were getting below market values. Literally 1 month later, it all changed. 1 month. And that's likely to happen again based on all of these things. Now, only time will tell, but all of these little bits and pieces help us forecast forward as to what can happen. If you've got that long-term belief like we do, then there is really good buying opportunities.
You know, I've now talked to 4,000 investors at least in the last 7.5 years since we started doing this. Not one of them, myself mainly included, hasn't been shitting themselves when they came on board. Not one of them hasn't had questions, doubts, concerns about Brisbane. It's hard. It's tricky. And it's like, the other thing is I haven't spoken, like we talk to basically all of those clients almost every year, or we try to. Either they proactively reach out to us or we proactively reach out to them. And these people, I can't see a single person that I bought for from 7.5 years ago to 5 years ago that hasn't made a minimum 200 to 500K on what we bought for them.
No.
Every single one of them at that time was shitting themselves. Yep. Now every time I pick up the phone, they're like, thank you so much. And I'm like, I told you should have done a second one. And they're like.
The crazy thing is as well, like the property share market economics guys do like a monthly webinar on their Boom Bust Bulletin. You have to be a subscriber to get access to that, which costs a yearly fee. I'm not too sure how much it is, but it's pretty affordable.
It's a crystal clear roadmap that we've had for 6 years. It's like, if it was $100,000 a year, I'd probably pay for it. Like, yeah, it's worth so much more than they charge, which is like
investor for
a couple $100 probably.
But they looked at the last 70 years in the United States, because that's what leads everything. And over the last 70 years, we've had 11 interest rate rising cycles. Now, 10 out of those 11 cycles where interest rates went up, whether it was a long time slow interest rates or a really sharp aggressive one like we've just experienced, 10 out of 11 times, by the time that from when the rate rising cycle began to when they stopped, property prices rose. So there isn't this super strong correlation between, you know, interest rates rising and property price decline. Now, it's happening in parts of Australia right now, albeit the most expensive sectors of the market. When you look at Michael Matusik's analysis of Australia, it clearly indicates that the upper quartile of the market, $1.5 million plus, is significantly leading those declines.
My house has taken at least a 600K bath.
Where this has probably only taken about a 50 to 100K bath. Like, that's how it's worked. So it's just, rather than reacting, just look at the data, look at the research. It's out there for you. Like, it's out there most of the time for free for you to get access to.
Yeah, like I just wanted you guys to know how strongly we feel. Like, Ben Everingham doesn't know what's going to happen today, any day. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen in the future, but I follow very, very clever people that have very, very different perspectives and opinions.
Decades of experience.
And they're just data heads, and they all look at it from their own slice of the pie. And by collecting those different ideas, Brisbane looks phenomenal. And whether you guys are in a position to do something or not is absolutely irrelevant, but keep an eye on it and just have a look in, 10 years, just do a mental recap, like where's Brisbane at that time? Because when I look at what these guys in the Financial Review and Courier Mail are saying, some of the suburbs we're buying at now for 700K, they expect to be worth 1.3 to 1.5 on average, and they're naming the suburbs that are going to do this, which are in our list for 7 years. And then, there's other suburbs that are at 600K average that they think will be worth 900K to 1.2 mil. And so you don't have to be a rocket scientist to nail Brisbane. You can absolutely do it yourselves, guys. And for an extremely small number of people, like we've just cut the number of clients we're going to take on this year back even harder. We would love to just have a really, really, really meaningful, deep, long-term relationship where we take you from where you are with the support of your accountant, your financial advisors, and the other people who you respect in your life to where you want to be. For some of our clients, like Hammett, she wanted $100,000 per year of passive income as a single mum, and she bought 2 houses and built 2 granny flats on them 5 years ago. And she's working 3 jobs, but she had a really strong goal of making that happen.
And some people don't like that granny flat strategy, so we go for 3 single income houses for those types of people. Like, that isn't our be all and end all. You know, with the 10 clients that we work with each month, we may only buy 2 or 3 granny flat sites.
Yeah, not even
Sometimes. So it's certainly not the be all and end all, but it's just when you run the numbers, it really stacks up.
100%. Like, you know, we've got other clients like Emily, who's just starting again next week on her 4th or 5th property with us. She's got other stuff in Melbourne and Byron Bay as well.
Gold Coast.
Goldie too. And she's done a combination strategy. Some houses with granny flat potential and one that she's actually put on, and others that are just absolute blue chip, undervalued suburbs. Some of them I think are as undervalued as much as 60%. Then we've got other clients like Ben and George that have done that combination strategy. And then we've got other clients that are like, I just want the highest quality, tenant ready, in the most undervalued street pocket of the suburbs in Brisbane that you can find me. And I just don't even want to think about this for the next 15 years. And I want long-term wealth because I love what I'm doing. And so it's like, it's cool wherever you're at, whether it's starting at a $450K budget or a $2 million one, Brisbane represents incredible buying, but it is one slow step at a time. First step, figure out where you are. And then that's simple. Can I borrow? Can I not? And then secondly, do I want to buy? I don't want to buy. It's too scary. I do want to buy and I can. Third step, get a clear plan in place and understand the market. Fourth step, get obsessively educated from us about the suburbs that are going to work for you based on us ripping apart 400 of them and then going, these are like the silver bullet suburbs. And then slowly move into the market over a series of 1 or 2 months until you feel so good about it and you know it like you do your own home, and then buy. Do a crazy amount of due diligence to make sure it's okay, and then get introduced to the best people in Brisbane so that you can sleep easy at night knowing that they're looked after. And it's a 3-month process. Of course, on the first call or the first video, it's going to be scary. But after months, the most common thing is, I can't believe how simple that was. The second most comfortable thing is when I talk to people we worked with in the past is I do wish I had like the stomach to take more action in those times when you guys said it was a good time.
Yeah, and a lot of the time as well, our clients, we get to the point where we found a really good property, and because we've done so much, we've spent so much time and we've done so much work developing the strategy and the plan, educating them on the market and the suburbs and the types of property that we'll buy, that when the right one comes up, they go, this is the right property for me.
They know.
Because they've made that decision from an educated perspective. They're not just coming in, and we don't just go, hey guys, here's the property that you buy. We start with, as Ben said, the strategy, the long-term plan, the short-term plan, the suburb education, the market education. We look at the market, we look at the sales history, we look at the sales maps, we talk to property managers locally. We do all of that work so that we're making that educated decision, because we want it to be a partnership. We want to work together. We don't just want to, send properties. Like, we want to teach everybody how to do this and what we've learned from buying hundreds of millions of dollars worth of real estate.
The ideal outcome has always been, and the way that we've set this up as a buyer's agency, is to get you so educated that you never have to work with us. But because of the results we get from the way that IID suburbs, we get at least 60% of those people working with us again within a couple of years. And so, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. Brisbane looks good. It's not as scary as everyone would have you believe right now, but there's like downside to times like this. And if they can't get inflation under control, then property prices could take a 20% bath. I actually believe they already have. It's just not showing up in the data. I think we've passed the sentiment bottom personally, but we'll still see 9 months of like lagging data, because that's how long it takes to show up properly. And by the time it hits bottom, we'll be, I believe, 3 to 6 months past the bottom, and it will be confidence again. But yeah, I could be wrong. Like, this is the best thing about recording this journey over the last 7.5 years. Like, I've done heaps of market updates. Go have a look at what I said in 2020.
Yeah.
Go have a look in 17, 18. I'm so glad that it's all out there.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I don't know what the hell's going on. I just follow insanely clever people that obsessively look at stuff and then try and make the best decision I can. And don't get me wrong, I've stuffed up on like more than half of my personal properties myself, but I'm making better decisions now.
Yeah, of course. No, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Please, if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review and share this video with somebody that could get some value out of it. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, support us. We're just trying to bring you the knowledge that we have from following all of these different resources and the things that we've learned from investing in our own portfolios, but helping many, many, many people just like you invest in the Southeast Queensland property market. At the end of the day, we have an abundant mindset and we just want the absolute best for everybody. We want to see you go out there and overcome your fears and challenges, take action and move toward becoming the best version of yourself.
Woo! That's a wrap. That's a wrap. Have a spin.
Bro. Yeah. Oh, sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good. That's so nice. Oh.